I once sat in a room holding a piece of paper that had my wife's handwriting on it. She'd been dead 3 years, and I remember thinking, and this is the exact thought, I haven't cleaned it up for you. She touched this. The atoms she exhaled are probably still in this building. And then the physicist in me started talking, which is sometimes a gift and sometimes a curse. He said, "The moment she wrote this, that moment is not erased. It happened. It is, in some very precise sense, permanent. That thought didn't fix anything. Grief isn't fixed, but something shifted, not away from the sadness, into it, into something that felt less like losing and more like distance, across time instead of across death. And I want to show you what I mean by that." Her name was Arline, and I want you to hold that name for a while, because this whole conversation begins with her and ends with whoever you're thinking about right now. Because you are thinking about someone. I know that. You didn't click on a video with this title because you were bored and had nothing better to do. You're here because something in you, something quiet and persistent, and a little bit desperate, needed to hear a different answer than the ones you've been given. And I respect that. I think you deserve a different answer. I think you might have always deserved it. So let me tell you something before we get into anything complicated. I am a physicist. I have spent my life being curious about the way things actually work, not the way it feels like they work, not the way we wish they worked, but actually. And the single most surprising thing I have found, the thing that nobody told me would be the most surprising, the thing I stumbled into sideways while I was looking for something else entirely, is that reality, looked at carefully and honestly and without the protective fog of comfortable assumptions, is more generous than any story I was ever told about it. Not easier, not painless, but bigger. So much bigger. Big enough, I want to show you today, to hold the people you've lost without requiring them to simply vanish. That's what this conversation is about, and I am going to take my time with it, because you've taken your time with grief, and it owes you a slow and careful look in return. Now, I know what some of you are already thinking. You're thinking, here comes the part where he tells me they're in a better place, or they're watching over me, or love is eternal in some greeting card kind of way. And I want to say, with genuine warmth and zero condescension, that is not what this is. I'm not going to ask you to believe anything. I'm going to show you something. Something that comes from the mathematics of spacetime, from quantum field theory, from the actual equations that describe how reality stores and processes information. And then I'm going to let you decide what to do with it emotionally, because that part is yours. I have no business telling you how to feel, but I might have something useful to say about what there is to feel about. Here is the thing that has been bothering me, in a productive way, for a very long time. We use the word gone like it means something precise. We say someone is gone, and we mean it to be final, complete, total, as though the universe ran some kind of deletion process, and everything that person was, every breath, every moment of consciousness, every laugh, every act of kindness, every complicated and imperfect and beautiful thing they did, as though all of that was simply removed, erased, ceased. And here is what troubles me about that. I cannot find any law of physics that actually says that. I've looked. I keep looking. And what I find instead is something much stranger and much more interesting, and, once you sit with it long enough, much more tender. What I find is that the past doesn't go anywhere, and I mean that in a very specific, non-metaphorical equations on the blackboard kind of way. The past is a structure. It has geometry. It has location. And in the most carefully worked out models we have of what spacetime actually is, not what it feels like from inside a human nervous system moving forward through it, but what it actually is, the past is not less real than the present. It is differently located, and that is a distinction that changes everything, if you let it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up the way I always do when something matters, and start with Arline. She was sick for a long time before she died. Tuberculosis, in a time when tuberculosis was still a word that meant the slow loss of someone you loved. And I did what I always do when I am faced with something I cannot solve. I paid very close attention. I paid attention to her hands. I paid attention to the specific sound of her voice when she was tired versus when she was trying not to show me she was tired. I paid attention to the way she smelled, which is an intimate thing to say, but grief makes intimacy feel less like an oversharing and more like a duty. Like if you don't memorize everything, you're somehow failing them. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you've tried to memorize someone too. And when she died, what I experienced, underneath all the things I was supposed to feel, underneath the procedural sadness, the arrangements, the letters of condolence, all of it, what I experienced was something more specific than grief. It was a kind of spatial disorientation, like I had been moving through a familiar room for years, and suddenly one of the walls was gone. Not broken, not damaged, just where a wall had been. Now there was open air, and I kept turning to say things to that wall. I kept starting sentences in my head that were addressed to her, and then the open air. Every time. It was some months later, sorting through her things, that I found the letter. It was addressed to me. She had written it ahead of time, knowing, because she always knew things ahead of me. That was her particular talent, knowing that there would come a day when I needed to hear her voice, and she would not be there to provide it. And so she wrote it down, and the letter was written in the present tense, not "I loved you," not "I was glad to know you." Present tense, the way you write to someone who is in the next room. And I read it, and I cried, which I was not in the habit of doing, and then, because I am who I am, I started thinking, when did this become past tense? At the moment of her death? Or at the moment the ink dried, because the ink dried while she was alive? The love in this letter was present tense love when it was written. And the paper doesn't know she's gone, the handwriting doesn't know she's gone, the photons bouncing off these letters into my eyes don't know she's gone. They're just doing what photons do, carrying information, faithfully without editorial comment, across whatever distance is required. And that's when the physicist and the grieving husband found a piece of common ground. That's when I started thinking about what the universe actually does with what has already happened. And if you'll stay with me, I want to walk you through that thinking. Not because it will make the sadness smaller, I genuinely don't promise that, but because I think accurate sadness is different from inaccurate sadness. And I think you've been carrying some inaccuracies, and I think putting them down might free up some energy for the real thing, for the grief that's actually yours. Not the grief that was handed to you by a model of reality that's too small. Let me tell you about starlight, because this is where it got interesting for me, and I suspect it might be where it gets interesting for you, too. When you look up at the night sky on a clear night, really look, not just glance, but actually stop and let your eyes adjust and take it in. What you're seeing is not the present. Almost none of what you're seeing is the present. You're seeing light that left its sources years ago, decades ago. Some of what you're seeing left its source before there were humans on this planet to look at it. The light from the Andromeda Galaxy, which you can see with the naked eye if you know where to look, left its source roughly 2.5 million years ago. The galaxy might have changed substantially since then. Some of its stars might not exist anymore. And yet, the light is here. The photons are physically present. They are traveling through the lens of your eye, landing on your retina, triggering signals in your optic nerve. Real, immediate, physically present in your body right now. And we don't say the Andromeda Galaxy is imaginary because we're seeing its past. We don't say it doesn't exist because the image is old. We built the Hubble Space Telescope to see it better. We pointed instruments at it with tremendous seriousness and care. We treated it as a real object worthy of study, worthy of attention, worthy of the full respect of our most careful thinking. Because it is. The age of the light doesn't make the source fictional. Now, a person who lived, a person who breathed and loved and made mistakes and fixed some of them, and made more and was complicated and human and present, that person emitted light too. Not just literally, although actually literally as well, because every warm body emits infrared radiation, but metaphorically and causally and in every sense that matters for how the universe keeps records. Every word they spoke moved air molecules, every step they took displaced matter. Every relationship they had changed the neural architecture of another human brain. Every decision they made sent ripples through the causal structure of reality, ripples that are, even now, still traveling. And the question I keep returning to, the one I want to sit with you inside of for a little while, is this: does the existence of something require your ability to reach it? The Andromeda Galaxy is real. You cannot reach it, not in any time frame that matters to a human life. The distance is too great. But distance is not the same as non-existence. Every scientist on the planet agrees with that when we're talking about galaxies. I want to see if we can agree with it when we're talking about people. When we're talking about the specific, irreplaceable, permanent people who have moved through our lives and then moved to a location in time that we cannot currently reach by walking forward, that phrase, a location in time that we cannot currently reach by walking forward, is not poetry. Or rather, it is poetry, but it is also physics. And the physics part is what I want to spend some time on now, because I think it matters. I think it changes things. And I think you came here because you needed something to change. Here is the idea. It is called, by physicists who study such things, the block universe. And the name is not very poetic, I'll admit. We are not always the best at names, but the idea is extraordinary. The idea is this: time is not a river. Time is not something that moves, carrying the present forward while the past recedes behind it like the wake of a boat. That is how time feels, from inside a human nervous system moving through it in one direction. But that is not what time is. What time is, in the framework of Einstein's general relativity, which has been tested and confirmed and refined for over 100 years, and which currently represents our best physical description of reality. What time is a dimension. Like the 3 dimensions of space that you can move through, left and right, forward and backward, up and down, time is a 4th dimension. And all 4 of them together form what physicists call spacetime, a fabric, a geometry, a landscape that contains everything that has ever happened or will ever happen, all at once. Now, when I say all at once, I don't mean all at once in the way a crowded room is all at once. Everyone simultaneously in the same present moment. I mean all at once, in the way a book is all at once. Think about a novel. The first chapter doesn't stop existing when you turn the page and start the second chapter. The final chapter doesn't unwrite the first one. Every chapter of the book exists simultaneously in the physical object you're holding. The story has a sequence you experience it one page at a time, moving through it in order. But the sequence is not more real than the other chapters just because you're currently reading it. All the pages are equally real. All of them exist. In the block universe, space-time is something like that book. Every moment that has ever occurred, every Tuesday afternoon in 1987, every morning of every year, every instant of every life that has ever been lived, all of it exists in the geometry of space-time, permanently, immovably. Your experience of moving through time is like your eyes moving across the page. It's your experience of the sequence, not the sequence's evidence, that only the current page exists. The other pages are still there. The other moments are still there. And the moment, the specific, precise, unrepeatable moment, when your person was alive, when they were laughing or tired or eating breakfast or telling you something you've thought about 1,000 times since, that moment exists in this geometry. It has a location. It is a real place in space-time. It has not been deleted. It has not been erased or evaporated, or somehow less realified by the passage of time. It is there, fixed, permanent, in a location you cannot currently reach by walking forward. I want to say that again because I think it needs to be heard more than once. The moment when they were alive is a real place. The universe keeps it. Not as a memory, not as a trace or a residue or an echo, as a location, as a real, physical, geometrically precise coordinate in the structure of spacetime. And the only reason you can't visit it is that you are a creature who moves through time in one direction, at one rate, and the location is behind you, not beneath you, not destroyed, behind you. The way a city is behind you when you've driven past it. The city is still there. You just can't see it from where you are. Now I know. I know what some of you are feeling right now. Because I felt it too when I first really sat with this idea. There's a part of you that wants to say, but that's cold, that's mechanical. That makes the universe sound like a sculpture, a frozen thing, indifferent and still. And what does it matter that the moment exists if I can't reach it? What is the comfort in a coordinate I can never visit? And I want to sit with that objection, because it's a real one. It deserves a real answer, not a dismissal, not a spiritual bypass, a real answer. Here is my real answer. The permanence is not the comfort. The permanence is the fact. The fact changes the question. And the changed question is where the comfort lives, if comfort is available, which I won't promise you. I won't promise you comfort, but I'll show you the changed question, and you can decide what it does for you. The old question is, where did they go? And the old answer, the one we've all been living inside, the one that makes grief feel like a free fall into nothing, the old answer is nowhere. They went to nowhere. They stopped existing. There is no location. There is no where. There is only the absence. And absence, I'm sure you've noticed, is a very large and very cold thing to try to live inside of. The new question, the one the block universe makes possible, is, where are they? And the answer to that question is there, at a specific location in space-time, at the coordinate of every moment they were alive, every moment they were themselves, every moment they were in the same physical space as you. There, not here, but not nowhere. There, and there is a very different thing from nowhere. There has a direction. There has a reality. There is a place that exists even when you can't see it, the way cities exist beyond your windshield even after you've driven past them. This changes the geometry of grief, not the intensity, not the legitimacy, not the love at the center of it, but the geometry. It changes grief from a free fall, from a falling into nothing, which is the most terrifying kind of falling, because there's no bottom, no ground, nothing to hold. It changes it into distance, into the very specific pain of being separated from something real, of knowing where the place is, and not being able to get there. And separation, I promise you, is something humans know how to hold. We do it all the time. We hold the distance between ourselves and people we love, who are alive and far away. We hold it, and it aches, and we tend to it, and we keep the relationship alive across the distance. We call it love. We consider it one of the things we are most capable of. What if grief is that? What if grief is long-distance love, love across a distance that happens to be measured in time rather than space, and that happens to be uncrossable in this direction? Love for someone who is real and located and permanent, and simply, he says, as though it's a simple thing, simply at a remove you cannot currently bridge. I don't think that makes it easier. I want to be careful not to promise that, but I think it makes it more accurate. And accurate pain, in my experience, is pain that has somewhere to rest. Pain without accuracy just ricochets. It bounces off the walls of the wrong room forever because it's trying to make sense of something inside a framework that doesn't have the right shape for it. Give it the right room, give grief the right model of reality, and it still hurts, but it knows where to go. It knows what it's about. And that is not nothing. Now, I want to take a slightly different angle on this, because I've been talking about the past as a location, and I think that's important, and I want to make sure it's settled before I move on. But there's another part of this that I think is equally important, and it's about influence, about the way a person continues to operate in the physical world after the moment of their death. And this part might surprise you because it's more immediate than anything I've said so far. It's happening right now, as we speak. Here is something that physics takes very seriously, perhaps more seriously than any other single principle. Information is conserved. This is not a metaphor. This is not a comfort offered by someone who wants you to feel better. This is one of the foundational commitments of physics, debated at the highest levels, defended and refined over decades. Information, the specific, precise physical configuration of a system, is not destroyed. It can be transformed. It can be scrambled so thoroughly that recovering it becomes practically impossible. But it does not cease to exist. The universe does not delete information. What does this mean for a person? A person, in physical terms, is an extraordinarily complex configuration of matter and energy. A person is a system that has interacted with the rest of the universe in specific identifiable ways over a specific calculable period of time. Every interaction a person has with the physical world leaves a trace, a real physical trace, the air they moved, the food they ate, the ground they walked on, the hands they held, the words they spoke, which moved air molecules in specific patterns, which were received by specific ears, which caused specific neural patterns to form in specific brains. All of this is physical, all of this is information. And information is conserved. Now, the information of a person is not neatly locatable after their death. It's not like you can point to a specific place and say, there is where she is. The information has been distributed, mixed into the vastness of the rest of the universe, scrambled into complexity so enormous that we cannot practically trace it. But scrambled is not the same as deleted. Distributed is not the same as destroyed. The information is still there, in the system. All of it. Somewhere. And then there's the part that I find most remarkable, most emotionally significant, and most directly relevant to how you live your daily life, the part about influence. A person influences the world in ways that do not end when they do. This is not mysticism. This is cause and effect, the most basic principle of how anything works. A person says something to you, and that something changes the structure of your brain. Literally, physically, measurably changes the neural architecture. The neurons that fire together wire together, as the saying goes. And a conversation, a real, significant relationship-embedded conversation, fires a lot of neurons together. It leaves physical marks. The person who had that conversation with you has, in the most literal possible sense, changed your physical structure, changed the matter of your brain. And that change, those literal, physical, causal changes that the people you've loved have made in you, those do not stop when they stop. They are in you. They are part of you now, the way the chisel marks are part of the statue. You cannot separate them out. You cannot point to where you end and where the influence of someone you've loved begins. They're mixed in. They're woven in. They are part of the material of the person you currently are. And the people you currently are, all of you carrying all of that, are out in the world every day, making further changes, speaking words that change neural architectures, making decisions that alter the physical structure of reality, living lives that are partly, inextricably, causally connected to the people who lived before you and shaped you. And so the influence continues, the ripple keeps moving, the information keeps propagating, not in a mystical sense, in a mechanical, physical, cause and effect sense that has nothing to do with what you believe about the afterlife or what happens to consciousness after death, in a sense that is simply, this happened, and therefore that happens, and therefore this other thing happens, and the chain does not require the original link to still be visible in order to keep pulling. I want to be careful here. I want to make sure I'm not sliding into something soft and misleading. I am not saying the people you've lost are alive in you and therefore fine. I am not saying the loss doesn't matter. The loss is real. The specific, irreplaceable, one-of-a-kind consciousness that was your person is not available to you in the way it was. And that is a real loss, a complete loss of that specific kind of access. I'm not minimizing that. I don't want to minimize it. But I am saying that the model of the universe where someone dies and simply ceases in every meaningful sense, the model where the death is the total end of every dimension of their existence, that model is not what physics describes. And if you've been grieving inside that model, which most of us have, because it's the model we were handed by a culture that hasn't sat with the physics very carefully, then you might be carrying extra weight. Weight that isn't yours. Weight that the universe didn't actually assign to you. And I'd like to help you put some of that down. Let me tell you about the second time I found Arlene after she was gone. It was much later. Years later, I was teaching a class, a large undergraduate lecture, the kind where you look out at 200 faces and try to find the 2 or 3 who are actually tracking what you're saying, and you teach to those 2 or 3, and hope the rest pick up something in the peripheral. And I made a joke. A specific, particular kind of joke, the kind that has a very precise structure, a setup, and a pivot and a landing that works because of the exact timing. And the class laughed. And in the microsecond after the laugh, in that little breath of silence before the next thought, I heard the joke differently. I heard it the way she would have heard it. And I knew in my body before I knew in my mind that the joke was hers. The structure was hers. She had taught me that structure, not by sitting me down and explaining it, but by living with me and being funny in a very specific way for years, and that way had become part of how I thought about timing, about misdirection, about the architecture of a moment that lands. She was in the joke, in the physical architecture of how I constructed it. She was in the room, in that sense, not as a ghost, not as anything supernatural, as a cause that was still producing effects, as a part of the structure of who I was, expressing itself in the world. Changing the air molecules in the room, with a joke that had her fingerprints all over it, even though no one in that room had ever met her. And I thought, this is how it works. This is what continuing means in the physical world. Not a soul floating somewhere, not a consciousness preserved in some other dimension. Just cause and effect. Just, I loved someone and they changed me, and I carry those changes everywhere I go, and they keep expressing themselves in the world, mixing with everything else, making further changes, rippling outward into a future that neither of us can see. I still find that thought both comforting and clarifying. Comforting because it means she isn't simply absent. Clarifying because it means I have a responsibility. Because if the changes she made in me are still going somewhere, if they're still producing effects in the world, then the quality of those effects matters. What I do with what she gave me, that's not just my story. It's still partly hers. And that means I owe it some care. Now I want to talk about memory, because I think we've been thinking about memory in a way that makes it feel like a consolation prize. Like, the real thing is gone, but here, have a memory. Keep it somewhere safe. Take it out occasionally and feel sad about how it's fading. And I want to suggest that this model of memory as a deteriorating photograph of something absent, is not only psychologically unhelpful, but also physically inaccurate. Memory is not storage. Memory is not a photograph or a recording or a file in a cabinet. Memory is an act, a physical act. When you remember someone, your brain is not retrieving a stored image the way a computer retrieves a file. Your brain is reconstructing. It is actively rebuilding the neural pattern that was first created by the real experience. It is running the simulation again, and every time you remember someone, every time you bring them to mind with real specificity, with real attention, with real love, you are doing something that is closer to contact than to retrieval. Let me try to say that in a way that doesn't sound abstract. When a radio receives a signal, it is not inventing the music. The music exists elsewhere as a pattern in electromagnetic waves, and the radio is sensitive enough to detect and reconstruct that pattern. The radio doesn't contain the music. The music is not inside the radio. The music is real, and the radio is an instrument sensitive enough to reach it. And what your brain does when you remember well, when you remember with specificity and attention and care, your brain is doing something analogous to that. It is reaching, it is reconstructing, it is using its sensitivity to touch something real. Now, I know the analogy isn't perfect. Memory is fallible in ways that radios aren't. Memory distorts. Memory fades. Memory is vulnerable to suggestion and to time, and to the ordinary erosion of anything biological. And that is painful, and I don't want to pretend it isn't. But here is the thing I want you to sit with. The fallibility of the instrument does not make the target fictional. A telescope with an imperfect lens is still pointing at real stars. The distortion is in the lens, not in the sky, and your memory, imperfect as it is, with all its biological noise and temporal erosion, is still pointing at something real, at moments that existed, at a person who was, at coordinates in space-time that the universe keeps even when your brain's imperfect reconstruction of them gets fuzzy at the edges. And what that means, practically in a way you can actually do something with, is that tending your memory is not a sentimental indulgence. It is maintenance of an instrument. It is calibration. It is the responsible care of the best tool you have for reaching across the distance to where your person is. And that is worth doing. That is worth doing carefully and intentionally, and with the full seriousness you'd bring to anything that matters to you. I want to talk about something that doesn't get talked about enough, which is the specific way grief makes time feel wrong. Because I think this is important, and I think the physics is actually useful here in a very direct way. One of the strangest experiences of grief, and I suspect you've had this in some version, is the sense that the person who died is still somehow in the present, not in a delusional way. Not in a way that confuses you about what's real, but in a very specific way, where the habits of relationship keep firing even though the relationship is no longer available in the same form. You think of something funny, and you start to reach for your phone before you remember. You see something they would have loved, and your first instinct is to tell them. You buy a food they liked without thinking about it, and only realize at the checkout that no one is going to eat it. These are not failures of grief. These are not signs that you're not processing correctly. These are the correct functioning of a nervous system that was genuinely physically shaped by that relationship. The grooves are real. The habits are real. The neural pathways are real, and they keep firing because that is what neural pathways do. And here is the physics of it. Your nervous system is, in a very real sense, a record of your past. The way you move, the way you think, the patterns of attention you have, the specific timbre of your emotional responses. All of it is the residue of your history. You are a living archive, and the people who have shaped you most deeply, the ones who really got into the architecture, they are part of that archive, part of your physical present, part of the structure of how you currently function. They are not just in your memory, they are in your reflexes. They are in the specific way you laugh. They are, and I mean this in the most literal physical way, they are still here in you in the present tense, doing what they always did, which is shaping you. And so when grief makes time feel wrong, when the dead feel simultaneously gone and present, when you can't figure out if you should speak about them in past tense or present tense, when something in you rebels against the finality of the past tense verb, that confusion is not a confusion. That confusion is an accurate perception of something that is actually complicated. The dead are in the past tense in one very important sense, which is the sense of their autonomous, independent biological existence. They are not currently generating new experiences in the way that you are. That part is past tense. But they are in the present tense in the sense of their continuing influence, their physical residue in you and in the world, their permanent location in the geometry of spacetime. That part is present tense. Both things are true, and the fact that we only have language for one of them, the past tense, the goneness, is a poverty of language, not a verdict of reality. I find it interesting that some cultures, some languages, some ways of being in the world have instinctively landed on this more complicated truth. Cultures that don't say the dead are gone, but that they have moved to a different relationship with the living, that speak to the dead not as an act of self-delusion, but as an act of accurate relationship. That tend the dead the way you tend any relationship that matters, with attention and conversation and care. I don't think those cultures are being superstitious necessarily. I think, in some cases, they may have worked out something that my culture, with its very biological model of death, has been too tidy to accommodate. They've worked out that the relationship doesn't end. The form of the relationship changes radically. The access changes radically. But the relationship, the ongoing, causal, influential, tendable relationship between the living and those who have lived, that continues. And the treating of it as a relationship rather than an archive might be closer to accurate than we've given it credit for. I want to be honest about what I don't know, because I've been trained my whole life to be honest about what I don't know, and I think now is not the time to stop. I don't know if there is anything it's like to be the past. I don't know if the coordinates in spacetime where your person was alive are anything more than geometry, if there is any experience happening there, any awareness, any something that it's like. That is genuinely unknown. The question of consciousness, of what gives rise to the experience of experience, is one of the deepest unsolved problems in all of science. And I am not going to wave my hand and tell you I've solved it in a YouTube video. I haven't. Nobody has. It is a real mystery, and I want to honor it as such. But here is what I can say, with full confidence in the precise language of physics. The past exists. The moment your person was alive exists. The information they were and the influence they had is conserved. The changes they made in the physical world, including the changes they made in you, are still propagating. These things are not in question. These things are as solidly supported as anything in our current understanding of how reality works. And they are enough, even without the question of consciousness being settled. They are enough to change the geometry of loss, to change it from a falling into nothing to a holding of distance. And distance, as I said before, is something we know how to do. So let's talk about what to do with all of this, because I didn't come here just to hand you an idea and leave you with it. An idea without practice is just something to feel clever about, and I'm not interested in you feeling clever. I'm interested in you feeling less like you're falling. The first thing I want to offer you is something I'm going to call the coordinate practice. And it's very simple, which is intentional, because grief takes up a lot of cognitive resources, and you don't have a lot left over for complicated instructions. It's this. When grief hits, and it will hit in the grocery store, in the car, at 3 in the morning, in the specific ambient light of a Sunday afternoon that reminds you of something you can't quite name, when it hits, instead of experiencing it as the absence of something that no longer exists, try locating the person. Try, as precisely as you can, placing them at a specific coordinate in time, not a general, I miss them, something specific. Try, they are at the moment they taught me to drive, and that moment exists, and it is permanent, and it is real, and I am here, and they are there, and this is distance, not deletion. Or, they are at the morning we sat in the kitchen and didn't say much, and it was enough, and that morning exists in the geometry of space-time and will never not have existed, and I cannot reach it by walking forward, but it is there, and they are there, and I am here, and what I am feeling is the very specific pain of being unable to cross that distance. This is not affirmation. I want to be very clear about that. I am not asking you to chant a mantra until you feel better. I am asking you to practice accuracy, to retrain the instinctive narrative of absence into a more physically accurate narrative of distance, because the mind follows the narrative, and a narrative of distance, painful as it is, allows for relationship in a way that a narrative of non-existence does not. You can love across distance. You cannot love across nothing. Do this for 30 days. Every time grief arrives and says, "They're gone," answer it, not by denying the grief, but by correcting the physics. They're not gone. They're there. I'm here. I feel the distance. And the distance is real, and so is the there. The second thing I want to offer is something I'm going to call the telescope practice. Because we've established that memory is an instrument, an imperfect, biological, time-degraded instrument, but an instrument nonetheless, and instruments require maintenance. Instruments require care. An uncalibrated telescope doesn't mean the stars aren't there. It means you're not seeing them clearly. And you deserve to see them clearly. Set aside time, not all the time, just specific time, once a week or once a month, whatever feels sustainable, to practice remembering with specificity, not the general warmth of, I loved them. That's real, but it's not specific enough to be an instrument. Specific, what did their hands look like? Not in general. Specifically, what were they doing with them in the specific memory you're reaching for? What was the light like? What sounds were in the background? What were they about to say? What did their face do just before they said it? Specificity is noise reduction for memory. The general degrades quickly. The specific holds longer and holds more of the person. It takes effort to get specific, which is the point. The effort is the calibration. You're adjusting the lens. You're reducing the noise. You're doing the work of keeping the instrument accurate. And write things down, not as a monument, not as a memorial that you build once and then treat as sacred and finished, as ongoing data, as calibration records, because memory is not fixed. Memory drifts, and writing is a way of creating an external check, an anchor, a data point to return to and say, yes, it was this specific thing, not the general version my brain defaults to when it gets tired. Talk to other people who knew them. This is important and underrated. Other people hold different details. Other people were present for moments you weren't. Other people's memories of the same person are like different instruments trained on the same source. By comparing readings, by sharing data, you improve the accuracy of all of them. And the conversation itself, the act of speaking the person's name, of telling the specific story, of hearing someone else respond, yes, that was them. That was exactly them. That conversation is an act of contact. It is you and another person together, both reaching toward the same coordinate in time. And that reaching together is one of the most human things I know of. The third thing I want to offer is something I'm calling the ripple audit. And this one is a little different from the other two, because it asks you not to look back, but to look at where you currently are, to look at yourself, to look at the choices you're making and the values you're carrying and the ways you move through the world, and to find in those things the ongoing influence of the people who made you who you are. Once a month, ask yourself 3 questions. You don't need to write them down if you don't want to, but I think writing helps. The 3 questions are, what did I do this week because of who they were? What did I avoid this week because of who they were? And what in me is still being written by them? The first question finds the direct expressions, the joke told in a specific way, the particular way you cook something, the things you notice in a room, the words you reach for, the way you listen. These are the legible marks, the clear influence. And they're worth naming, because naming them is a way of saying, look, they're still here, in this specific act, in this particular moment, right now. The second question finds the shaping by contrast. Sometimes people shape us most deeply, not in what they gave us directly, but in what they taught us to move around. The cautionary examples, the things you swore to do differently and then found yourself doing anyway in some new form. The pain they had that you've spent your whole life trying not to repeat, and the wisdom of that avoidance is theirs even if the avoidance is yours. That's influence too. That's them still shaping the contours of your life. The third question is the one I find most interesting, because it's the one that acknowledges that the writing isn't finished. You're still being written. The influence is still arriving. As you grow and change and encounter new things, you encounter them with the structure that they helped build in you. And that structure filters and shapes and responds in ways that are partly theirs even now. The writing continues. The ripple is still moving. And asking where it's going, asking what they would make of the person you're becoming, is not a maudlin indulgence. It's a form of ongoing relationship. It's staying in conversation with someone who has moved to a different location but who is, in a very real and physical sense, still in the conversation. I want to spend some time now on something that I've been circling and haven't quite landed on directly. which is the question of what we owe the dead, because I think this question changes substantially and importantly depending on which model of reality you're living inside. If the dead are simply gone, if they have ceased in every meaningful sense, if they are nowhere, then what we owe them is whatever comfort it gives us to honor them. It's a one-directional thing. We do it for ourselves. We do it for the community of the living who share the memory. It's generous and it's meaningful and it's deeply human, but it's essentially self-directed. You can't owe anything to nothing. But if the model I've been describing is closer to accurate, if the dead are at a real location in space-time, if their influence is still propagating in the world through everyone they've touched, if what they were and what they did is permanently embedded in the geometry of what has happened, then the question of what we owe them opens up differently. It becomes possible to owe them something real, something that matters beyond our own comfort. And what I think we owe them, and this is not physics anymore, this is me, Richard Feynman, who has thought about this for a long time, offering you his best personal answer. What I think we owe them is to be accurate, to see the world as clearly as they were trying to help us see it, to carry the things they valued with some care and attention, to let the influence they had in us be expressed in the world as fully as we're capable of expressing it, not as a performance, not as a grief project, as a genuine continuation of the conversation that their death interrupted but did not end. I think we owe them our honesty, our full, clear-eyed, non-sentimental honesty, including the honesty that they were not perfect, that the relationship was not perfect, that there were things unsaid that cannot now be said in the usual way, and that sitting with that discomfort, the discomfort of the unmended, the incomplete, the interrupted, is part of what accurate grief looks like, not fixing it with a false narrative where everything was beautiful, not drowning in guilt over what wasn't said, just holding it clearly. This is what was, this is what wasn't, this is what I wish had been different, this is what I will carry forward differently because of it. And I think, this is the part that surprised me when I worked it out, I think we owe them the full experience of our own lives. We owe them our aliveness. Because the thing that has been taken from them, the thing that is genuinely, categorically different about being dead versus being alive, is the ongoing generation of new experience, the ability to be surprised, to be changed by something new, to keep becoming. That is what biological death ends. And we are still doing it. Every day, we are still surprised, still changed, still becoming. And to spend the irreplaceable forward momentum of our still living lives, collapsed entirely in the direction of the past. I don't think that honors them. I think it wastes what they no longer have, on behalf of them. Living well is not a betrayal of the dead. It is the most specific form of respect I can imagine for the thing they had that is now over. They had a life, they used it, imperfectly, the way we all do. They kept moving forward for as long as they were able, and then they were no longer able. And the moving forward is in your hands now, not instead of them, not leaving them behind, with them, carrying them as causes in your effects, carrying them as locations in the landscape of your past, carrying them as voices in the ongoing interior conversation that every conscious person has with everyone who has ever mattered to them, with them, moving forward, together, across the distance. Here is something I believe very deeply, and I want to say it plainly, because I think plainness is what it deserves. Curiosity is not the opposite of grief. I know it might feel that way. I know that when you're in the thick of loss, the idea of being curious, of being interested in the world, of finding things worth exploring and thinking about and getting excited over, I know that can feel like a betrayal, like moving on, like forgetting, like choosing life over them, but curiosity is what took me to every interesting idea I've ever had. And the most interesting ideas, the ones that have actually changed how I live, how I see, how I hold the things that hurt, those ideas came from being willing to look at hard things with an open eye instead of a clenched one. Grief with curiosity is different from grief without it. Grief with curiosity asks, What is this, really? What is actually happening here, in the most honest description I can give? Grief with curiosity won't let you settle for a model of reality that's too small for what you're actually experiencing. And I think that's what you've been doing coming here today. I think you've been bringing curiosity to grief. And I want to tell you, that is not a betrayal of your love. That is love taking itself seriously enough to want to understand. Let me tell you one more thing before I start to close this up. There's a principle in physics that I have always found oddly moving, and I want to share it with you because I think it belongs in this conversation. It's the principle of conservation. In physics, certain things are conserved. Certain quantities don't change, don't disappear, don't evaporate even when everything around them is changing dramatically. Energy is conserved, momentum is conserved, charge is conserved. And, as I've mentioned, information is conserved. These conservation laws are not suggestions. They are among the deepest, most thoroughly tested facts about the structure of reality. The universe does not lose these things, cannot lose them. It transforms them, redistributes them, scrambles them into forms we might not recognize, but it does not lose them. And I find myself thinking about love in those terms. Not because love is a physical quantity in any measurable sense. I want to be honest, it's not. It's a subjective experience. It's a pattern of valuing, but because the things love produces in the physical world are subject to the same conservation laws as everything else. The changed neural structures, the altered behavior, the words said and the silences held and the hands held and the decisions made for someone else's sake, all of that is physical. All of that is embedded in the causal structure of reality. All of that is conserved, in the only sense that conservation means anything. It is not destroyed. It continues to participate in the unfolding of what happens next. And that means, in some very real sense, that love is not destroyed by death. The experience of love, the ongoing present-tense experience, that changes when someone dies. The form of love changes completely. The access changes. The way it can be expressed changes. But the effects of love, the things that love has already done in the world, those continue. Those propagate. Those participate in the ongoing story of everything that happens from now on, across time, across death, across the distance. And you are one of the things that love has already done in the world. Think about that. You are a physical effect of the love of people who are no longer alive. People who lived before you, who shaped the people who shaped you, who are nowhere in any biological sense and everywhere in every causal sense. You are walking proof that love outlasts death, not because of anything mystical, because of physics, because of cause and effect, because of the simple, unstoppable fact that what has happened keeps having happened forever in every consequence it ever produced. You are a consequence of love that had nowhere to go but forward, and so is everyone who will ever love you. And so is everyone who ever will. I keep coming back to our line. I've been doing it my whole life, in a way, coming back to her as a reference point, as a specific case I can reason from, as the person who made the abstract personal. And when I think about what her death taught me, not what I wish it hadn't taught me, not the cost, but the actual teaching, I think the most important thing it taught me is this. Presence is not the only form of aliveness. I got very precise about what I missed. I missed her specific presence, the specific, moment-to-moment, responsive, generative presence of that particular person. That is what death takes, that very specific thing. But that very specific thing is not all there is of a person. It is the most irreplaceable part, yes. It is the part that cannot be substituted, cannot be archived, cannot be recovered in any form once it's gone. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But it is not the only part. And the other parts, the influence, the information, the permanent location in space-time, the ongoing causal ripple, those are real too. And treating them as real, actually living as though those things are real and matter and deserve attention and care, that is a different way to be in a life that includes death. which is to say, a different way to be in a life, which is to say, the only kind of life there is. I want to say something to you directly now, not as a physicist, not as someone who has worked out a framework, just as a person who has loved people and lost them and spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the losing actually means. You are not doing this wrong. Whatever you are doing with your grief right now, however you are holding it, however imperfectly, however inconsistently, however much it confuses you, you are not doing it wrong. Grief doesn't have a right way. It has a direction, which is toward more clarity, more honesty, more accuracy about what is actually being lost and what is not actually being lost. But the path toward that clarity is not straight, and there's no schedule, and no one gets to tell you you're taking too long or feeling too much or not feeling enough. Those are not things that other people get to assess from outside the experience. What I hope this conversation has given you, what I aimed for, what I always aim for when I'm trying to explain something that matters, is a larger room. Not a room where the grief is smaller, but a room where it fits differently, where it has the right shape for the space available, where the sadness is about the actual, precise, real thing being grieved, the distance, the changed access, the loss of the ongoing generation of new moments with that specific person, and not about a false narrative of total annihilation that the universe doesn't actually endorse. Because you deserve to grieve accurately. You deserve to miss the right thing in the right frame for the right reasons. You deserve to know that what you're missing is real and located and permanent. You deserve to know that the relationship isn't over in every sense, that some of it is present tense and ongoing and available right now, if you know where to look. You deserve to know that you are a living proof of the existence of the person you're grieving, and that every day you are in the world, doing the things they shaped you to do. You are conducting their influence forward into a future they helped build, in a universe that keeps everything. That is not nothing. That is, I would argue, a very great deal. It doesn't fix the specific, particular, irreplaceable ache of their absence, but it changes the landscape around that ache. It gives it a context that is truer to what the universe actually says about the matter. And true context, in my experience, is the beginning of everything. It's the beginning of every good idea I've ever had. It's the beginning of every real conversation I've ever been part of. It's the beginning, perhaps, of a different way to be in the specific sadness that brought you here today. Let me bring this home. Let me say the whole thing, one more time, in as few words as I can, because I think some of you need it in short form. Something you can actually carry. Time is not a river. It is a landscape. Every moment that has ever happened has a permanent location in that landscape. The people you have loved are at the coordinates of every moment they were alive. They are not gone. They are at a distance. You cannot reach them by walking forward, but they are there, and there is real and permanent, and the universe keeps it faithfully. The information they were is conserved. The influence they had is still propagating. The changes they made in you are still expressing themselves in the world, every day, every time you act in ways that carry their fingerprints. Memory is not storage. Memory is contact, reaching through time with the imperfect instrument of your nervous system towards something real. And you can calibrate that instrument. You can tend it. You can keep it pointed at what is actually there. And grief, the real thing, the core of it, is not a response to nothing. It is not falling into absence. It is the very specific, very human, very real experience of being separated from something that exists, of knowing where the thing is, and being unable to get there. That is a real pain. It deserves to be taken seriously. It deserves to be called by its right name, and its right name, or at least one name closer to right than the one we usually give it, is love across distance. Long-distance love, love that knows its target is real even when it can't be reached. You are not broken. You are not failing grief or being failed by it. You are a person who loved someone and who is now at a location in time that they are not at. You are separated from them by the one form of distance that we have not found a way to cross. And you feel it, which means you loved them, which means they were real, which means they were worth grieving. All of that is true at once. And it can all be held at once if you're willing to stand in a room that's big enough. Here is the mantra I want to leave you with. Say it however feels right, out loud, in your head, in the middle of the grocery store when it hits you. I am not carrying a memory. I am maintaining a relationship across a distance that happens to be measured in time. They are real. The distance is real. My love is reaching, right now, for something that exists, and the universe keeps it. The universe keeps everything. If something in this conversation landed somewhere real in you, if even one phrase found a place to rest that felt like it might actually help, I'd genuinely like to know. Not for the engagement metric. I'm not very interested in metrics. I'm interested in the specific texture of what resonates, in what questions it opens rather than closes, in what other rooms in this house of ideas you'd like to explore together. Leave a comment. Tell me what hit and what missed. Tell me what question you came in with and whether it's changed shape at all. Tell me what you're thinking about now that you weren't thinking about 45 minutes ago. I find that kind of report deeply interesting. And if you know someone who is in the specific particular pain that this conversation was aimed at, someone who is falling, who has lost the model and not yet found a bigger one, consider sending this their way not as a fix. Fixes aren't real, and I wouldn't promise one, but as a room with some more space in it, a room where their particular sadness might fit a little differently. That is all I was offering today. That is all I ever offer. A room with more space. Come in whenever you need it. The universe keeps it open.